Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I am your host, Benedikt, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen-Flood. How are you, Malcolm?
Hello, Benny. I am so good, man. I had my first full weekend in a couple months at least, and it was amazing.
Wow.
It was so good. It was so nice having some time off with my lady and just getting to be lazy.
Yes,
I mean, we actually went for a couple runs and stuff, so we really weren't that lazy. But the times that we were lazy, we were so lazy.
Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, that, and I think that's so important. I think honestly, that's so important because even like your sort of fun activities outside of work can sometimes be, I don't know, almost feel like work or like obligations or whatever, or stress, and sometimes you just you should just do anything. I think you shouldn't do anything. Yeah, totally.
Just need to sit and chill.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. I'm doing good as well. Pretty exciting. It's funny that you mentioned that you went for a run you went for runs because we haven't talked about running in a while, but I have some exciting things to share with you. And I don't think I should do that because it puts pressure on me. But I like to do that. I think to push myself. So what I did is I signed up this weekend. I signed up for my first ultra race. So
whoa.
I did run a marathon in the past, and I ran ultra marathon distances in training just for fun in the past. But it was more of a combination of walking and running and not really fast. But that's how ultras typically are if it's a trail thing, But this time it's going to be the first event that I'm doing, the first race at the ultra distance, and I haven't run a race in 4 or 5 years now. The marathon that I did is 7 years ago, so I gotta get in shape, and I signed up for a 68K race.
68 kilometers.
68 kilometers. Wow. Yeah, this is a little over 40. I don't know, 42, 44, 34 miles.
42.25, 32 miles.
Exactly. Yeah. So a marathon is 42 kilometers, which is 27 miles, I think, or something.
Something like
that. And I'm running 68 with 2,500 meters of elevation gain. So in the hills here in the national park. So it is quite a challenging race. It's going to happen on October 1st. Extreme. And now I have half a year to prepare for that. And I'm super excited. I'm more excited for the journey and the preparation than the actual race, to be honest, because I just needed something to push myself again because I miss these long runs so much. And all I did the last couple of weeks and months was quick half an hour run here and there. But I really want to do the long stuff again, and now I have to. So
awesome. Well, that makes my race announcement very lame. I am signing up for a 7-kilometer trail run this weekend.
Awesome. I mean, that's not lame at all. Depending on how you run it, you can, if you go all out, 7K on a trail can be cruel, really cruel. It's
78 versus 68. So 7 kilometers versus 68 kilometers.
Yeah.
That is hilarious. Wow. Good for you, man. That's so amazing.
Yeah, I don't really know if it is, but we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, I'm stoked. I'm trying to prepare myself well, and then we'll see how that goes.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's what happened here, and I changed my routine already. I switched to running before work again, just to get the time, to get the miles in, the kilometers in early in the morning, and so yeah. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, good for you. That's so good. Here to segue this into relevancy for music people. I just finished an album with a band called Vogue Villains, and it took. We pulled up the calendar. We went over 12 months in the creation of this, from initial pre-production chats to them having the masters, and. So that, to me, was an album is an ultra marathon, and I don't think bands recognize that. I don't think they realize that when they're starting one. They think it's a 7-kilometer run.
Yep.
But it's actually an ultra marathon.
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah, I think so. And it's, there's both way, but for most people it's true. They think it's the shorter one, and then it turns out to be an ultra marathon. And in both cases, I think it's you just have to, at some point, you just have to push through and not quit, basically, because I've seen that happen too with bands who spend a long time working on a record, and then halfway through they somehow lose the excitement or whatever, and then it kind of gets hard to finish the thing. So similar
Yeah.
to race. Yeah. By the way, if you are listening to this right now and you're planning your ultramarathon album recording, basically, I have a free guide for you, which gives you the 10 steps to successful DIY recording. Basically, it's like a mini PDF, like a mini ebook. It's a PDF with a couple of pages. It has like a framework for you, a 10-step guide from like creating your song through demoing, pre-production, recording, all the way through to the finished thing. If you want that, go to the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide. And it's a great way to get started. It like shows you the whole process in order, the right steps, what to do each step. And I think it's a great way to start in a good framework. So the selfrecordingband.com/10-step guide, and you can get that for free. All right. So part of that whole 10-step thing, the whole process, is something like, I think probably the most important part of that actually is what happens in front of the mic. So before you even record anything, like that, I think is always something that people also tend to skip, because we all love to talk about mic techniques and about mixing and about all these things. But it actually starts before the mic, before you hit record. And part of it is the writing and the arrangement, of course, but also part of it is how you actually play it. And that has such a big impact on how it sounds. It's true for almost for basically any instrument. And today we want to talk specifically about one instrument, or a category of instruments, which is guitars and bass. Because we believe that the tone when it comes to guitar recordings and bass recordings really is in your hands. And yes, there's mic technique, yes, there's amps, there's gear, and there's mixing techniques, but you can only do so much if the recording, if the performance is not there. And I've seen people grab the same exact guitar with the same exact rig, like two different people, and it sounds drastically different just because the tone is in the hands. And I remember you, Malcolm, you shared a story in one of our earlier episodes. I don't remember the name of the guitar player, but you were talking about somebody who was playing in a way. I don't know if I can't remember the name, but I think we were talking about strings and about thick string gauges and thin string gauges. And I remember you talk about at least one person who had like such a sound when he was playing. I think you played live with him. I can't remember the name, but maybe you know who I mean. But like,
it was probably Jesse Roper.
Yep, exactly. That was the one. Yeah, I've had a couple of people like that that I've seen play, and it was just incredible how they make their instruments sound. And that's what we want to talk about today, like what it is that you can do with your hands and what it is that you should avoid and why that all matters.
Right. Yeah. To make that make sense for listeners, what happened is that he has a guitar that I could barely find playable.
Oh yeah,
and sounded like junk when I touched it, and then he picked it up, and it sounded like he's got like Stevie Ray Vaughan hands, where it's just like, oh my god, that's so fat and awesome, and it's all in his hands. It's not the guitar. I can guarantee it's not the guitar. Nobody else can play it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've witnessed it a couple of times. It's fascinating, and two different people sound completely different. Every time I was in the studio with a band, and I was sitting next to them when we were tracking. Every time I grabbed the guitar to just show them something, or like if they couldn't play a part and I gave it a shot maybe or something, I was like, it was fascinating and shocking how it's like sometimes it worked, but sometimes I just couldn't do it. Like I could play it, but I just couldn't do the part for them, or I could barely show it to them because with their guitar, the way it was set up, and there's like I didn't sound anything like them. So it was like I had a couple of times I had that happen, and it's always fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, are there things that you in particularly think that you think are particularly important, or problems that you see happen all the time when it comes to that? Because I can think of a couple, but I want to ask you first.
Right. Yeah. So I'm sure we've mentioned this before, but there's kind of some skills that I feel like guitarists only develop in the studio, or at least notice sooner and start developing faster in the studio. And the main thing for me, I think, is going to be, I'm between two, but I think the one I'm going to go with would be like the death grip hand on the left hand, or I should say the fretting hand, because not everybody's right-handed.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the death grip, that is when you are sure you're holding the right fret and the right string, but you are bending the string all over the place, and your guitar is like never in tune because you are always pulling it out of tune. That is, I think, the most common and potentially the most destructive technique issue that I've come across frequently. And people can become really good guitarists without learning this skill, which is amazing. Because it just doesn't matter that much live, and it doesn't matter that much when you're playing by yourself, without other instruments, where intonation is much more important. So again, that's why the studio seems to bring this to focus, because all of a sudden you're hearing it under the microscope for the first time potentially, and you're like, why doesn't it sound right? Why does that chord sound out of tune? It's like, oh, because you're super out of tune. You can't play guitar in tune. And that is like a super hard lesson for people to get, and unfortunately way too common and pretty tricky to solve. It's not the kind of thing where I can just be like, oh, you're playing out of tune. They're just used to holding that same like grip all the time. So really tricky, and probably public enemy number one for guitar recordings, I think.
Yeah, that I can think of that in the second one that I'm gonna say it when we get to it. But I agree. I agree. That's also at least top 3 or top 2 probably for me too, this thing. And the death grip is, there's even more nuance to that, I think, because there is the bending, but then also depending on the guitar you have, some guitars, like Fender guitars, for example, some of them have these jumbo frets, that like these bigger frets. And if you have a guitar like that and you just press too hard, like you don't even have to bend the strings, like just fretting too hard can make the notes go sharp, and a lot, like it's not a subtle thing.
Yep.
So there's also that balance, like how hard you actually fret, and there's it's subtle, it's nuanced. Like there's a sweet spot, but if you go a little too hard, it's sharp. And some people sort of you can sort of compensate for that with your tuning if you know that and stuff. Some people just play like that, but like if you are not aware that this is happening, it's really tough, because you're going to tune your guitar and you're going to intonate it and you set it up and you're like, this is in tune. And then as soon as you play, it's not. Sometimes it's even in tune if you listen to the guitar itself, but then with the other guitar or the bass, it's sharp because you're like pressing everything too hard, or there's all these subtle things. I absolutely agree that the whole intonation thing, but in particularly what you do with your left hand, is one of the most challenging thing when it comes to recording guitars. So what do you do? What do we tell our listeners? What can they do to avoid that, or to make sure this is not an issue?
I really do think that awareness is like the first crucial fix, is like learning that you are doing it, pulling out a tuner, like a good accurate tuner, and fretting a note and seeing if it's in tune, and then and how much little changes change that tuning. So I'm really glad you just brought up that it's not necessarily pulling the strings, like bending them, which if you picture like a typical like major bar chord, your middle finger is common, the one that is like throwing that whole thing out of tune. That's an example of it being bent. Like you're pushing at it on an angle, so it's bending the string. Of course, it's going to be sharp, but what Benny's talking about is just pressing directly down. So you're not like bending the string, you're not pulling it, but by pressing it down, you are again bending it, and it's just in a micro way, but it really adds up. And if you're doing that differently across each string, your like relative tuning is going to be bad as well. So yeah, getting used to it and aware of it and seeing it, I think really will help your like mind kind of lock onto it, and your ear start to pick it out as well. And practicing like, okay, what do I need to do to get it there? This will also bring to the forefront the actual intonation issues with your guitar, which sometimes you need to learn. And then just, you just got to practice. Now, one of my favorite fixes to this to make it easier is just going to bigger strings. They're much harder to push down too hard and bend, so you just do it less. It's wonderful. Yes. It's more work to play them, but this like really, because you can't go too soft. That's maybe a misconception people might be imagining. Okay, so I just need to hold softer. Yes, to an extent. Once you go too soft, it starts buzzing, right? Because you've all remember trying to learn guitar, and you press down and you can't press hard enough, and it starts buzzing. That will happen. So you either go too far, perfect, or it's buzzing.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't have to worry about going flat. Like that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and like your fingers don't have to touch the fretboard. Like it's the string just has to touch the fret, and then it's fine. So okay, so that is one thing. Let's say with the left hand. I think while we read it, so the death grip is one thing. Now you've already touched on it with like being fretting not hard enough is where it starts to buzz maybe. So I think the chord definition, like how clearly can you hear each of the individual notes and strings in each chord, that's also something that is in the left hand, because you might be slightly muting one of the strings without really noticing, or you might not be fretting consistently, like maybe like 3 of your fingers are right and then one is just a little too light and it buzzes or it like mutes the string. So the definition, like how solid the chord is, how the sustain, like how the notes ring out, and how well you can pick out the individual notes in a chord, that is something I think that is, unless you don't do weird things with your right hand, I think that's in the left hand as well. Like just a solid, clean way to like fret the chords. This is something that's harder to do than you would imagine sometimes. So I don't play guitar often enough to be really good at it, and I struggle with that sometimes. Like I don't really notice when I practice, but sometimes I like to capture ideas with an acoustic guitar, for example, or I like to just play at home with my kids or something. And whenever I record that with my phone, or just like, yeah, capturing ideas or capturing a fun thing that I do with my kids, when I listen back to those things, I'm always shocked at how bad my playing actually is, like how bad those chords sound. Like I'm constantly muting things and things are buzzing, and like I just have a hard time playing clean guitar chords sometimes. It's really not that easy, and I've been playing guitar for quite a while now. So I think that's something to be aware of with your left hand. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I absolutely agree, and I want to actually jump to the right hand equation of chord definition too, because I think that like it's a problem on both sides in recordings. Yeah. And the reason this episode's happening is because we both mix music for people, and sometimes we get requests like, oh, like can you make like I can't hear the hammer-ons going on in this part kind of thing, on this like strummy hammer-on riff kind of thing. It's like, well, it's because now here's my example. The right hand plays a huge role in chord definition too, because if you're not hitting only the strings you intend, even if they're muted, it just starts cluttering shit up. I don't know why I swore there, but I'm passionate about this. What the hell, guys?
Absolutely.
I hope that Thomas just puts like a big beep so nobody knows what swear I said. Yeah. It's like, whoa, Malcolm's pissed. But like, yeah, if you got like an open string ringing out that's not meant to be there, it's gonna cover up with the stuff that is intentional. And there's no fixing that in mixing. Like what happens, what gets played on the guitar is what's going to be there. You can't just remove like, oh, I wish they didn't hit that string. It's gone now. It's not possible. So making sure the chord is like articulated in both your left hand and the right hand is only giving the performance exactly what strings and notes you want. Totally crucial.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. I'm glad you added that. Totally right. So, yeah, and that sort of ties into the next thing here, which is the sustain. I had that on the left hand again. Again, if you don't fret right, if you're pressing down too softly maybe, or it's mainly that, then the note just will not sustain long enough. It like or you might not be aware that you might fret the chord correctly, but you maybe lift your fingers too early, or you kill the sustain with some movement you make in your left hand. Sometimes people just don't keep it there solid and consistent until the next chord, and they move it too early, and they're killing the sustain, sometimes of the whole chord, sometimes of individual notes. If you play a solo or some single notes, then also like how you change to the next note and how you sort of kill the last one is so important. So the sustain and the transition to the next note, this is all in your left hand. And so I really think, and there's these types of guitarists, I don't know what they do, but some guitarists, it just, with the same sort of setup, they just make their guitar sing. They just have a sustain. They just make the thing resonate. I don't know what they exactly do, but it's crazy compared to others where the notes just seem to die. I don't know.
It just dies off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another trick you want to learn, I just got to say, if this podcast gets released in a video format, you got to go watch it. Benny just do that spiel. He was air guitarring with his left hand the entire time. I don't think he was even aware.
I didn't even know.
He was just fretting away. And like, I could see the sustain coming off his hands. It was great.
Yeah. Oh, sorry for that.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. But yeah, this is another thing that so much of good guitar technique is isn't learned until you end up in the studio, unfortunately. So recording yourself early and seeing how your performance sounds when you listen back on via a recording is super, super valuable. And the sustain being one of those things. This is what makes guitar so hard, is that there's no sustain pedal like a piano. Imagine if there was, how great that would be. But when you take your fingers off to change chords, the chord stops, right?
Yeah.
And we often need to create the illusion that that isn't the case. So it requires being really, really quick. And until you think about that and are listening for it, you might not even realize that you're taking your hand off like an eighth to even a quarter note, like in advance of the next chord, just to like make sure you get there. And then you're losing so much musicality if the riff calls for that. It's always circumstantial.
Yeah.
But totally worth drawing attention to. People are definitely sometimes shocked when they listen back and they're like, oh, weird. It's like so choppy. It's like, yeah, you have to get better at making that transition there. And especially if it's a tricky one and like the middle of the riff has a longer pause to get to the next chord than the other ones, because you're good at those. They have to be consistent, and it just takes practice.
Absolutely.
Intentional practice, I should say.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then the final thing, you mentioned the hammer-ons. So I put a thing there, a bullet point there that I called feel. So I think a lot of the signature sound of like guitarists is also in the left hand, of course, for me, like, because I mean the right hand too, but I don't know, particularly how the vibrato sounds, the hammer-ons, the nuances and the playing, I don't know, it's like everybody has a different feel and everybody has sort of a signature way of playing guitar, especially when it comes to solos, and I don't know. And so that to me is also in the left hand. And I really think that there's an art to that. It's not just about hitting the right notes at the right time, but like tasteful vibratos and all that. It's just a feel category for me. That's just all in the left hand to me. It's the right hand is more about the consistency to me and about the power, and we get to all of that. But like the feel, especially with longer sustained notes, solos, and stuff like that, is in the left hand, I think.
You're right. I think most of the personality lives in the left hand. You know how people like let notes ring until they get to the next one. Often intentionally or sliding between stuff, does their hand fully lift off while they jump around, or does it slide across? Like there's all these little things that generate your sound. And if there's something that's important about it, you need to try and recognize this. This is another tricky thing to self-diagnose, because you don't really know what makes you sound like you. You're just doing it. But if you do hone in on what it is that's like making your playing unique, you can at least monitor that it's being captured in the recording process.
Yeah.
It's because of all these things we've said, that it's like, oh, you're pulling too hard, or you're lifting off too early. There's a string buzzing that's not meant to buzz, kind of thing. People tend to get really safe and careful while recording guitars and just want to be very surgical about it. And it's kind of possible and easy to lose some of that feel and like personality that makes your playing you, because you're just focusing on like having the perfect power chord. And you're like, screw the bar chord. I'm just going to play a power chord now. It sounds more in tune. Stuff like that can come at a cost. So you almost need to know what it is that's important about the oddities you're playing, and make sure that you don't lose them.
Oh yeah, totally. That's just such a big one. In fact, I get it quite a lot, where I get revision notes, like mix notes, revision requests from bands, where suddenly when everything's mixed and things are more clear, they pick out, like, I don't even hear these things because I'm so focused on the art, on the music, on the impact. I don't care about like slight string noises and stuff, unless it's like really annoying, but like that's just part of what it sounds like to play a guitar to an extent, but like people tend to pick that stuff out and like really get hung up on that. And instead of like making notes on the stuff that actually matters, they'll be like, hey, here at like 2 minutes and 57 seconds, there is this one little metallic string noise. Can you please cut that out? Or there's this squeak here and there. Like, I always find it fascinating how, as you said, like how surgical and careful people get when it comes to that, when I don't even care about these things often, like unless it's like very, very super annoying. So yeah, you want to have some of that in there in favor of the feel and your signature way of playing and the way you sound. But if it's obviously too much, if it's buzzing and squeaking all the time, you got to do something about it. But it's not the most important thing for sure. And I had an interesting conversation on my other podcast. If you want to listen to that, it's called the Outback Recordings podcast. And sometimes I do. It's the most of it's all interviews, and most of the interviews there are in German. But I sometimes do interviews with international bands, and I just recently did one with Hot Water Music. So if you're in the punk rock, indie sort of, the punk rock world, more or less, this is a pretty well-known big band from the US and a big punk band, and they've been around for a while, for like almost 30, no, not 30, it's 25 years now at this point, I think. So anyway, I listened to their latest record, and I think it's really, really amazing. And I had the bass player on the show, which was super exciting for me. And I listened to the record, and I spotted, this was one of the rare occasions where I spotted some really obvious string noise stuff that came from the bass. But it didn't really bother me. I just found it interesting that it was so obvious and it was in there in this like very well done production. And I was talking to him about it. I was asking him about it, and he was like, "Oh no, please don't. Like, this is a whole thing. We've been talking about that all the time when we were making this record. Like, I don't care about these things. It's just the way I play, and it's my sound. But my drummer, like, he kept telling me about this like for weeks, and we had arguments about it. And like, the producer thought it's sick, like it sounds like a human being, and it's rad and all. And the bassist doesn't mind, but the drummer like couldn't stand it, and it was this whole thing." And it was, and funny enough, it was the first thing that I spotted when I listened to the record. So. But again, it didn't bother me. It was just something that I thought is just part of the character. And I actually enjoyed that because it sounded like a human, and it was a small imperfection that made it even better for me. But there's this fine line, you know. So,
there
but that stuff like that, is in the hands, though. This is in the hands. Like how careful you are, how, you know, you got to define that for yourself, but you got to be aware of that, I think, at least.
Yeah, and on the same page, because like you just pointed out, it's subjective, and your drummer might hate you for it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, he was actually like, okay, now I've ordered a pack of flat wounds now. They're like beside me now. Like no. I'm gonna try those just to see how that sounds.
That's the exact opposite of what we want.
Yeah,
just the flat rounds.
Yeah, exactly. I was the same thing. Like I don't think he was too serious about it, but he's like, okay, now I ordered a pack of flat wounds because I never want to hear them complain again. Like, so. Yeah, so that's about it for the left hand for me, at least. Let's go to the right hand because it's just as important.
Yeah, so when I mentioned death grip, I said that's probably my number one. If it wasn't, consistency would be my other. And it's right hand consistency of just plucking at a very controlled dynamic that is intentional. So there's two levels of this. There's people that are entirely intentional and doing exactly what they intended with their consistency, and that is the best. And then if you're not that, I just hope at least you're hitting hard. and beginners are either hitting hard or soft, and that's like if I'm working with somebody that's not experienced in the studio, I just start pushing them to hit harder and figuring out ways to make that happen. And at least by trying to be hard, you end up with more consistency, I find. But eventually you want to build some intentional habits and skills in how things sound depending on how hard you hit them. And how hard you hit them will change the pitch to varying degrees as well. So it's important on the tuning side. And it's not only dynamics, I guess. It's also the angle to pick and where on the string you're picking, how your palm mute, how consistent your palm mute is, and all of that. It's really like the other half of your sound is coming from your right hand, and making that a very consistent thing is going to give you. I don't even know how to explain it. It's just everything. It makes the recording sound like what was meant to happen, opposed to just like this weird mess of like, why is all this other stuff happening, and why is the note getting quieter or sound different every time he hits it? We don't want that. We like the more consistent your right hand is, the more we can focus on the riff rather than the performance.
Totally. The whole groove, the whole impact, everything is in the right hand. The consistency is super important. Just imagine if you play an amp with any sort of distortion or overdrive, like even soft, like slightly overdriven sounds. If you hit, like you can change the sound of your entire rig, of your entire amp, just by hitting hard or hitting soft. Like it totally changes. And imagine if you play a palm mute part, like if you're chugging away and if it's not consistent, all of your individual hits are going to sound different. It's like it can get a mess really quickly. It's all about consistency. And when it comes to bass, like how solid the foundation is, how well it locks with the drums and stuff, that's all in the right hand. It's all about this consistency there. So it's the overall power, like how hard you hit in general. And then it's like also, or how hard you pick in general, but then it's also the consistency. Once you found the right way to play the song, you got to stay consistent with it. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a reason for, like, even professional guitarists and bassists, like in big, let's stay with the guitarists for now. Like for example, if we talk about Metallica has two amazing guitar players, and both of them could pull off the rhythm guitar. They could both do it, but like Hetfield is playing the rhythm guitar because he is a monster of a right hand. Like if he plays the palm mutes and the riffs and stuff, it just sounds different. So there's a reason for why he does all the rhythm guitars, and not just one, but like the double, all of them, because his right hand sounds like his right hand, and nobody else sounds like him. So, and there's a couple of examples like that, because there's so much of the sound in the right hand. And then I have it again. I have to say that again. This is also something I get with revision notes a lot, where I just had this last week where somebody was like, "Yeah, this part sounds good, but could we bring out the transients a little more, the attack? I feel like it's not defined enough." And I was really having a hard time doing that because it was a palm mute part, but it was like 16th notes, so it was like up and down strokes, alternate sort of picking, and it was just pretty sloppy. I guess also there was like a weird pick angle, so it had this long, scratchy attack type of thing, and not like a consistent, solid sort of attack. And this is a mix between the palm muting technique, the consistency, how hard you hit, and then the pick angle. As you said, all that goes into that. But the end result was like a pretty undefined thing that if you only listen to the DI, it was kind of okay, but with a high gain sound like the one that we used, it got really difficult to make that sound defined. So all that to say, this is why all this is so important, because there's only so much you can do with engineering and mixing if the performance is not right. Like none of these things that we mentioned today can be solved after the fact. They all have to be taken care of before anything like hits the mic. So this is why this is so important. And so awareness, as you said, is like the biggest thing. People just need to know that this is what is affecting their tone. And oftentimes I think people think it's just because they don't have the right amp sim or whatever, and they don't realize that it's actually their playing.
Yeah. I'm just going to read through the list of what we got here, because it's all inconsistency, really. There's power, there's palm muting technique, there's hand position. So that's like how far forward or backwards you're playing. And actually, where you rest your hand can even change the sound of things. Like on an acoustic guitar, how you touch the instrument, like rest your arm on it, is going to actually change how the tone of the instrument sounds. Pick angle. And then I guess this one's kind of unrelated, but also related, is talking about finger or a pick on the bass guitar. So before we jump into that, you really have to consider everything your right hand is doing, right? And experiment with it. A really great recording guitarist is going to be changing this dependent on the riff, song, everything. Like they're very intentional, and I really do believe that recording is the best way to get good at being a recording guitarist, because you finally actually hear these things back. It's just different when you're in the zone playing guitar for fun or with a band. When you're recording and focusing so micro on just like what's happening, what's being captured, you really start to spot all this stuff and see the difference it makes.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. So the attack, the definition, the groove, the timing, and also the presence, this is all in your right hand. The presence, just wanted to touch on that real quick. I think how hard you hit the strings is not only going to affect the transients and like the power and the consistency and the groove, but it's usually brighter also, and like the tone changes depending on how hard you hit things. And just to give you a couple of examples of each of these things, just one simple example per thing, I think that is more than enough here to tell you what it actually does or what changes. So we talked about consistency and power. When it comes to palm muting technique, just do the experiment, try it for yourself if you haven't yet. Just play some palm mutes and then press down on the strings a little harder or a little lighter. Move your hand a little bit and mute the strings at different positions, and you'll see how drastically the sustain changes, how much low end buildup you get, how much movement, or how like flat and two-dimensional things can sound. So the palm muting technique makes such a big difference on how it feels and sounds. The hand position, even without palm muting, if you pick closer to the neck pickup or closer to the bridge pickup or like really close to the bridge is going to be sounding drastically different. Like if you're picking
hugely different,
very close to the bridge, like it's a very bright, thin sound sometimes. If you get closer to the neck pickup, it's going to be a little fuller, but maybe less transient heavy or whatever, but it changes. And to just do the experiment, if you haven't done this before, if you never thought about this, just try that while you're recording and do it with intention, because some part might sound better in one position, and for another part you have to change things up a little bit. And really good guitar players do that intuitively. I think they, just like a vocalist would have a mic technique where they alter the distance to the mic, a good guitar player would know where to pick for certain parts in order for it to make it sound like they want to. So.
Yep. Yeah, you're dead on with that. You made me think of one more thing, and it's kind of like palm muting, but it's just muting in general. This is a very hard to fix thing after it's been recorded too. And what I mean by that is when you are trying to mute and stop the sound of the guitar, how do you do it? Do you use your right hand? Do you use your left hand? Do you just lift off your fingers a little bit? Or do you flatten all your left hand fingers on across the strings? Are you muting that way?
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different ways of trying to shut a guitar up, and I mean they can all work, but you actually really need to monitor that and see how clean and how quick it's happening, and does that timing work for what you're trying to accomplish? If you think about like modern metal where it's all that kind of stuff, like that's super hard. I mean, that's usually artificial editing to get it that tight kind of thing. But those players of that genre are so good at shutting their instrument up. Like they're so quick at clamping down, and that's part of that skill. And I think honestly a lot of like more rock guitarists could learn a lot from metal guitarists about controlling the opposite of making the guitar loud, of how to make the guitar shut up cleanly, because there's a total art to it.
Absolutely. If you've ever watched a video, do you know Drusiv? That guy who makes like,
I don't think so.
I don't know his real name. He's on, I don't know. I just know his Instagram name. He's I think he's called It's Drusiv, like DREWSIF. He's a metal dude. He's been doing it for a while. He has a pretty big following. He's doing metal covers and like super insane things. Like he's doing a lot of these review videos now for a couple of software companies, amp sims and stuff. And his playing is insane. It's really, really insane. He does exactly what you just described. Like it's a dude sitting in his basement playing guitar all day, I think. And like at least that's what it looks like. But he like literally like that is mastery. That is insane. So and there are a couple of people like that, like John Brown, like the Monuments sort of guitarist. He's also very good with the right hand. There's just some people like I think people can learn from that. And I'm glad you mentioned it. Cutting a chord off in the DAW and like doing a quick fade on something will never sound like actually muting your guitars with your hand. It's totally different. Like a lot of people think you can just have the chord ring out and then you cut it whenever you want. It will not sound like you're muting your guitar.
Yep. You know, same with drums. I just want to say right now, because this just came up in my real life. You can't just like be like, oh, I wish the cymbals just cut off, and it's like, well, he didn't grab them. It's not happening. Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. It sounds very stupid.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking of the same thing right now. Yeah, totally. All right, good. I think, and then the final thing is like the pick angle, where I don't know. That's also something I feel like people don't experiment enough with. Not just the pick choice, this is something for a different episode, but like the pick angle. It totally changes the way the transients are shaped in a way, or feel to me. Like if you minimize the point of contact basically to the strings, it's going to be very precise and you can have a very short defined attack. But if you like angle it a little bit and sort of have more of the pick be in touch with the strings, you can have this longer, scratchy sounding attack, which can be cool sometimes, but can be really bad other times. So you know, there's the difference between a attack and a click, you know, and you can play with that and it makes a difference. Just, again, be aware of that. And you might not notice that over time during a riff or something, your pick is slightly shifting, and towards the end of it, like during a palm mute part or whatever, towards the end of it, you have a different angle and then all of a sudden it starts to sound sloppy, you know? So these types of things.
Totally. Yeah. You know, do your homework and figure out how to improve each one of these. Yeah. You know, that's actually such a quick way. Like if you burn through this list with your right hand: consistency, power, palm muting, technique, hand position, pick angle, and pick choice we'll just throw in there as well. If you just play with those for an hour, you're going to come out a better sounding guitarist. What like a quick way to level up your playing.
100%.
Just a little experimenting. Just like you'll learn so much about your playing and your instrument. Different instruments need to be played differently. You know, you figure out where the sweet spot is on a telly, you'll be a happy guy. Absolutely. Okay, yeah, we should probably stop talking about this. We got another episode to do.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's enough. That's enough for people. I think we got the main point across. You can do so much without doing anything engineering or mixing wise. Like, you know, it will be so much better off. The mixing will be easier. All of that. Your amps will react better. You have so much more control over everything. And I'm pretty sure that at least one of the main issues that you're having with your guitar tone right now is actually can be solved with one of these things. Actually, the cause of that is probably one of these things and not your amp or something. So I'm pretty sure everybody can improve there. Cool. All right, let's wrap it up. Thank you for listening and talk to you next week.
See you next week. Thanks. Bye.